In August 1966, a young boy flying a kite on Vintem Hill in Rio de Janeiro stumbled upon a deeply unsettling scene. Hidden among the thick vegetation were the bodies of two men resting side by side. At first glance, it looked as though they had simply laid down to sleep. But as authorities arrived to investigate, the details of the scene quickly shifted from a tragic discovery into one of history's most bizarre mysteries. The deceased were identified as Miguel José Viana and Manuel Pereira da Cruz, two electronics technicians from a neighboring town. There were no signs of violence, trauma, or a struggle. What baffled police was their attire. Despite the rugged terrain, both men wore sharp formal suits paired with heavy waterproof trench coats. But the most chilling detail was what they wore on their faces. Resting over the eyes of both men were crude, heavy masks fashioned from sheet lead, precisely cut to block out all light. Beside their bodies, investigators found an empty water bottle, two damp towels, and a small notebook. The lead masks suggested they were expecting an intense blinding light, perhaps an explosion or radiation. The notebook, however, contained a cryptic schedule that only deepened the puzzle. Inside the notebook was a short, handwritten set of instructions. It read, 16:30, be at the agreed place. 18:30, swallow capsules. After effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. To this day, no one knows what the capsules were, who gave the instructions, or what the mysterious mask signal was supposed to be. Were they part of a secret experiment, an occult ritual, or something otherworldly? Friends of the two men later revealed that Miguel and Manuel were deeply involved in scientific spiritualism. They were obsessed with the idea of communicating with extraterrestrials and exploring paranormal phenomena. Some locals even reported seeing a bright glowing UFO hovering over Vintem Hill on the exact night the men are believed to have died. Were the lead masks meant to protect them from a spacecraft's glow? Unfortunately, due to a backlog at the coroner's office, the bodies severely degraded before an autopsy could be finished. A proper toxicology screening was never performed, and the mysterious capsules were never identified. The official cause of death remains completely unknown. Miguel and Manuel took their secrets to the grave, leaving behind only the lead masks and a haunting unsolved mystery. In 1976, the peaceful town of Circleville, Ohio, became the center of a sinister psychological thriller. It began when residents started receiving anonymous hand-printed letters postmarked from nearby Columbus. The letters were spiteful, containing intimate details about the townsfolk's private lives, secrets, and rumors. But the most vicious letters were directed at a school bus driver named Mary Gillespie. The anonymous writer accused Mary of having a secret affair with the local school superintendent. The letters threatened her, demanding she end the relationship immediately or face deadly consequences. Soon, Mary's husband, Ron Gillespie, began receiving letters too, mocking him and demanding he stop his wife's affair. The harassment escalated until Ron decided he had finally had enough. One night in August 1977, Ron received a phone call from the suspected writer. Enraged, he grabbed his gun, got into his truck, and drove off into the night to confront them. Shortly after, Ron was found dead. His truck crashed into a tree. The sheriff ruled it an accident involving drunk driving, but investigators found that Ron's gun had been fired once. Was he shooting at the letter writer? After Ron's death, the harassment against Mary only intensified. In 1983, Mary was driving her bus route when she noticed an obscene sign targeting her along the road. When she went to tear it down, she discovered it was rigged to a loaded pistol with a tripwire. The trap was designed to kill her. Police traced the gun's serial number to Mary's brother-in-law, Paul Freshour. Paul Freshour was convicted of attempted murder and sent to prison, seemingly ending the terror. However, the true mystery was just beginning. While Paul was locked away in solitary confinement, completely stripped of writing privileges, the Circleville letters continued to flood the town. They even arrived at the prison itself, mocking the warden and Paul alike. Paul Freshour maintained his innocence until his death, and many believe he was framed by the true mastermind. Decades later, the true identity of the Circleville writer remains completely unknown. Who was watching this quiet Ohio town so closely? And how did they uncover everyone's darkest secrets? The Circleville letters remain one of America's most baffling unsolved mysteries. In December 1900, a ship sailing near the remote Outer Hebrides of Scotland noticed something alarming. The light at the Flannan Isles lighthouse had gone completely dark. Days later, a relief ship named the Hesperus arrived to investigate. As the crew approached the desolate rocky island, they fired a flare and sounded the ship's horn, hoping for a response. But there was only silence. The three lighthouse keepers had vanished. The relief keeper, Joseph Moore, rowed ashore and climbed the steep stairs to the lighthouse. What he found inside was deeply unsettling. The heavy entrance doors were securely locked, and the beds were left unmade. In the kitchen, a meal sat uneaten on the table, and the main clock had stopped ticking. A single chair was overturned, suggesting someone had left in a tremendous hurry. But on an isolated rock, where could they go? 2 of the 3 heavy waterproof coats were missing from the entryway, meaning one of the men had ventured outside into the freezing Scottish winter in merely his shirt sleeves. The lighthouse manual strictly forbade all 3 men from leaving the light unattended at the same time. The investigators then turned to the official logbook, hoping it would hold the answers. Instead, it only deepened the chilling mystery. The final entries, written by keeper Thomas Marshall, described a terrifying, unprecedented storm. He noted that the wind was howling worse than he had ever seen in 20 years. He wrote that James Duckett, the principal keeper, had been unusually quiet, and that William MacArthur, a tough seasoned sailor, had been crying. The final entry simply read, "Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all." But here is the most baffling part of the entire case. Weather reports from nearby stations and ships passing through the exact area showed that there was no storm. In fact, on the days the keepers reported extreme, terrifying weather, the skies over the Flannan Isles were perfectly clear and the seas were calm. The massive storm they described in the logbook simply did not exist. Did a sudden rogue wave sweep them off the rocky cliffs? Did cabin fever drive them to madness and murder? Or did something else emerge from the dark, icy Atlantic waters? Extensive searches of the tiny island turned up absolutely no clues. The bodies of the 3 lighthouse keepers were never found, leaving the Flannan Isles mystery to echo endlessly through maritime history. In March 1922, a chilling series of events unfolded at Hinterkaifeck, an isolated farmstead in the Bavarian woods. The strange occurrences began days before any violence. Andreas Gruber, the patriarch of the family, found a set of footprints in the fresh snow. They led straight from the dark tree line directly to the house, but there were no footprints leading back. Someone had arrived at the farm, but they had never left. Soon after, the family began hearing heavy footsteps pacing in the attic above them. Andreas found an unfamiliar newspaper from Munich on the property, and a set of house keys mysteriously vanished. 6 months earlier, the previous maid had fled the farm in terror, claiming the house was violently haunted. The family hired a new maid, Maria Baumgartner. She arrived on March 31st, stepping into a nightmare on her very first day. That evening, the killer made their move. In a terrifyingly methodical sequence, someone lured the family members out to the barn one by one. Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their widowed daughter Victoria, and her young daughter were all brutally struck down with a mattock, a heavy farm tool. The killer then walked into the farmhouse, murdering the sleeping infant Josef and the newly arrived maid in her bed. But the most horrifying detail of the Hinterkaifeck case wasn't just the murders themselves, it was what happened next. The killer didn't flee the scene in a panic. Instead, they stayed in the blood-soaked farmhouse for several days. Neighbors reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney. The cattle were meticulously fed, meals were eaten in the kitchen, and the family's guard dog was calmly tied up in the yard. 4 days later, neighbors grew concerned when the family missed church and the mail began piling up. A search party went to the farm and made the gruesome discovery in the barn. Police interviewed over 100 suspects, ranging from angry locals to traveling vagrants. But the killer had vanished like a ghost. The farm was eventually demolished, leaving behind Germany's most terrifying unsolved mystery. In August 1912, the Dunbar family took a fishing trip to Swayze Lake in Louisiana. It was meant to be a relaxing summer getaway, but tragedy struck when 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar vanished. Hundreds of volunteers searched the murky, alligator-infested swamps, but they found no trace of the little boy. The heartbroken parents offered a massive reward, sparking an 8-month nationwide manhunt that gripped the entire country. In April 1913, authorities finally caught a break. They found a wandering handyman named William Cantwell Walters, traveling through Mississippi with a young boy who perfectly matched Bobby's description. Walters insisted the child was Bruce Anderson, the son of a woman who worked for him, and that he had her permission to take the boy. The police ignored his pleas, arrested Walters for kidnapping, and returned the child to the overjoyed Dunbar family. However, the joyous reunion was immediately clouded by controversy. A woman named Julia Anderson arrived in Louisiana, desperately claiming the boy was her son Bruce. The courts forced a lineup, but Julia struggled to identify the boy among other children. The Dunbar family, completely convinced the child was Bobby, fought fiercely in court. The legal system sided with the wealthy Dunbars, and Julia Anderson was sent home empty-handed and heartbroken. Walters was convicted of kidnapping and spent 2 years in prison before his conviction was overturned on a technicality. Meanwhile, the boy was raised as Bobby Dunbar. He grew up, married, had children of his own, and lived a full life under the Dunbar name until his death in 1966. For decades, the case was considered officially closed. But in 2004, Bobby's granddaughter, Margaret, decided to investigate the lingering rumors of the Anderson family. Margaret convinced her father, Bobby Dunbar Jr., to take a DNA test and compare it to the DNA of Bobby Dunbar's confirmed younger brother. The results were absolutely shocking. There was zero genetic connection between the two men. The boy who was rescued in 1913, raised in luxury, and lived his entire life as Bobby Dunbar was actually Bruce Anderson. The justice system had given away a woman's child, and the real Bobby Dunbar was never found.